If you manage a team, you are going to want to listen to the very end of this interview with business coach Andrew Laurie. That's often where we get stuck in business. We grow to a certain point, we hire a team, but some simple ways of managing team can actually be the answer to help you scale your business. We also talk about strategy. What is strategy? It's really a buzzword. You hear it a lot now, strategic planning, sales strategies. So really, what is a strategy and why is an overarching strategy so important for your business? Let's take a listen. Andrew, thanks for spending time with me today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Andrew, I'm going to start with an interesting question. Tell me, the word strategy. I think strategy, I think of strategy when I think of you. And strategy can be one of these words that's just thrown around with terms: marketing strategy, sales strategy, business strategy. What does strategy mean to you?
Yeah, you've picked on a favourite subject there, Michelle. It's great. It seems like if you add the word strategy or strategic to any other word, it just makes it cleverer. But that's not what it means to me. No, I think you picked on something that's really important, and unfortunately it's absent from a lot of businesses. To me, strategy is answering in a very simple, succinct way why or how and where a business is going to win. It's not about a marketing plan or a sales activity. It's a succinct statement of, this is where we're going to play and this is how we're going to win. This is why we will be the winners in 3 years' time. It doesn't change often. It's not a quarterly exercise. And it very much then guides the plans and activities that you move forward with. So it's a succinct statement of where you play and why you're going to be the winner in that space.
And does that come before vision, mission, or after?
I want to give a perfect textbook example, and I don't think there is a perfect textbook answer or example. So I'll give you what my experience would tell me there. I think it's iterative, actually. I think the theoretical answer is it comes after. Vision, in a sense, might be the ultimate answer to why we exist. Our 100-year picture, but in my experience, that without thinking through the realities of, and strategy, by the way, captures, yes, what does winning look like? What is our winning aspiration? It captures where we're going to play and why we'll be the winner. It also considers those core capabilities that we need to be brilliant at. So if you haven't thought through some of those questions, the vision might end up being nonsense.
I feel like we could just end. I feel like we could just end the interview right there. Like, that's just gold, just in itself. I knew this was going to be packed with value. So I'm going to just take a step back for a second. Why business coaching for you?
Okay, I'm gonna go. And by the way,
strategy.
Well, and funnily enough, I'm going to steal everything in this whole conversation. It seems, and I should emphasize that half of what I just said about strategy, I'm stealing. There's a great book, Playing to Win, which is a book about strategy. Anyone who's read it will recognize at least half of what I just said. But the question of why I became a business coach, I stole from someone else, Jim Collins, the great Jim Collins. The reason I'm a business coach is pure hedgehog concept, to use his language. And for those not familiar with it, the hedgehog concept talks about finding the thing, and he does it circles like a Venn diagram. He's looking for the overlap between three things. Something you're really, really passionate about. And for me, I love business. I've been involved in big businesses, small businesses, corporate for a long time. And I enjoy it. I love the subject. I've studied it. So I'm passionate about it. The second circle in the Venn diagram is something you reckon you can be really good at, something you can be successful with. And by the time I became a business coach, I'd worked in big corporates. I'd built a really big company, a company with a couple of billion in sales. I'd worked in different parts of the world, in different functions, and I'd got a good qualification. I had a good MBA and degrees, and So I felt like actually I might have some skills here. So it satisfied that I think I could be good at this. And the last part that you can never forget, it's all very well being passionate about it and thinking I could be really good at it. But again, using Jim's words, it needs to overlap with how it can drive your economic engine. And I looked at business coaching, the action coach model, of course, and thought, actually, I know what Coralie, my wife, and I have as our ideal life. We know how we want to live, and we can build a business here that really services that well, that allows us to have that ideal life that we and our family want to live. So it's a really good overlap of the three questions.
And we believe that business should give you more life. So that's a great example of that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, why do businesses often miss that step? It's almost like that's just such a great platform to start with. But often, they come back 5 years from when they've started and they've just missed that critical piece of where can we win? What are we passionate about? And how can we drive the economic engine? What's the bit in the middle?
It's a great question. Why do they not do it? And I'm not sure I'm confident I don't know the answer. I can speculate on a couple of the possible answers. People come into business, their own business, for different reasons. For some of them, it's just an evolution. They do something. They're I'm not going to say accountant because that's a natural progression to partner, but they might be a plumber, they might be an engineer, might be a computer engineer. And they do it and then they think, well, it's going to be better to start my own business because I'll have more freedom. That doesn't equate to thinking deeply about what is it I'm really trying to get to at the end. And that strategy framework, for example, involves thinking about what is my economic, where do I want to get to? It involves starting with what is my winning aspiration, not what should I do next. A lot of people evolve iteratively. I go to school, my parents chose my school, so I then did the next thing. Based on how I went at school, I got a trade or I went to university or whatever it is I did next, which was logical. And then I got a job or I started a little trade or I did what was next and then I did what was next. And eventually one day you wake up and think, oh, that's where it's got me, which can be fine, by the way. None of that involves stopping and thinking deeply about where do I want to end up in 10 years or 20 years or at the end. And so to do this proper strategy thinking, I think you do have to stop and not just do what's next. You do have to think more deeply about where am I trying to get to at the end. And a lot of people don't do that.
So you work with a lot of larger businesses or businesses where you actually take them through this process. Talk to me about what that looks like with a team.
With their team?
Yeah, or an example of a business and how you've done that with a team.
Happy to. It's and as you say, this is something I particularly love. Coming into a business where they've started, they've got somewhere, but they want to go a lot further. And if I'll talk about a specific example, and it's not a half the clients I work with are tech businesses, because typically when people come to me, they've hit that point where they've had enough success to want to create something amazing, but they've also had enough success to be completely unscalable. They've done well, they've got to a few million, but they don't have the governance and the systems and the team, and they themselves haven't become a strong enough owner, and they haven't learned they've got growth, but they haven't got scale up strategies, the next level. And I recall there's someone I still work with, but I started working with him quite a while ago, be 8-9 years ago now. 8 or 9 years ago, and it's not a tech business. It's an engineering services business, diesel mechanic. He'd started the business driving his ute round in the Hunter Valley, fixing machines for mining companies up in the Hunter Valley. And he'd done well. He's a very capable guy, and he'd grown it up a bit as a business and got it to a few million. And when he came to me, It wasn't that he had a bad business. It wasn't bad at all. But it was constrained. He was struggling to get the next bit of growth. He was also quite nervous that he was very exposed to one area geographically, one commodity. He was servicing coal mining companies, and the coal industry is not necessarily the best long-term position to be in. And so he had all this, how am I going to take it from here? And okay, technically the first thing we did was actually work on sales. He just needed to make the sales engine more robust. But very quickly, interestingly, the next step after sales, I think, was literally strategy. Get that clear, because it should be done early. Get really clear how to de-risk his business strategically, how to position it properly. But then it became largely throughout the process, the years, it's been largely a question about people. It's a question, we had to get his team running right. We did a lot of work on just the culture in the business, because that adds to scalability. That's a point of leverage. We did work on getting the right roles in place. And back then, he didn't have a lot of central management in place, but gradually that happened. He eventually got a general manager in place. Subsequently, a couple of years later, the general manager became a full CEO. They added a CFO. And so as the business is scaling, it's about building out the team, getting the right people, building out the culture, him as the owner becoming a more effective, having to grow and become a really effective founder, owner, not manager, because he's got other people in place for that. He did a great thing. He was worried. A lot of blue collar staff in his business. So talking about, values and corporate culture, he was worried that wouldn't really, they'd shake their head. This would be useless, would be a waste of time. And he did an amazing thing. He wrote a book written in this wonderful language, very colourful, very entertaining, but written as a tradie for tradies, telling the story of his company. He got his mum, who's an illustrator, to put in sort of illustrations. But in it, he described who we want to be and what sort of people we are and how we work and what's important. And when you read it, you put your corporate hat on and you say, hang on a minute, he's just articulated the vision and the mission and the BHAG and the culture and the values and the... But actually, it's in a one, and every person who works there gets a hardbound, hardcover copy of this book. And so things like this, building the team. Now, in the end, I get really excited by this one because he's got a family, 3 little girls, and he and his wife went overseas. He wanted to take them to Europe, and they actually just returned last week. They've just had 12 months living in Spain. They wanted their little girls to have a year of Spanish schooling, and they wanted to travel Europe and have that experience. Now, I remember sitting down with him years ago when he reached 10 million in sales. And we had a bit of a joke, Rusty, you've got to 10. I'm not sure you couldn't get to 20. And it was, from my perspective, it was a serious comment. He didn't take it seriously. But while he was having his year overseas, swanning around Europe, his CEO was running the business, and they passed 100 million for the first time. And I got very excited. I think so. Those sorts of experiences are great. But in the end, it was all the strategies, all the activities in business, but the people had to do them. And so by getting the right people, building the right culture, getting the leadership team right, without the cleverest strategy in the world was never going to get anywhere.
So team, you see so many companies hiring team maybe too early or not the right people. So when you're thinking about scaling a business and you're working with a business owner to help them, introduce, bring on team to their company to help them scale, what is the strategy that you use? What's the first hire? What's the first step?
That's a good question as well. I'm not sure there's a universal first step. Perhaps I might work backwards if it's all right. I'm going to work backwards from what seems to be the most common and significant mistake and problem that I see in this. And unfortunately, the mistake often still exists when you've got 100 staff, and it exists when you haven't got any staff, and it exists when you have 3 staff. And when I work with, quite often I'll work with the founder, but I'll also work with their executive team, with their leadership team. And it exists at that level with some very sophisticated and impressive people. People don't put enough time, energy, and focus into this question. It starts with realizing that in the end, the quality of the people you get and how well they perform will be the defining question in the success of your business. There is no business in the world for which that's not true. Businesses, sure, you'll give me examples of business that's wildly successful because of its amazing product. Somebody had to build the product in the first place. Somebody has to support the product, service the product. So investing enough time, energy, and effort, recognizing that it's all about the people. And so right up the beginning, if you haven't got anyone, it's actually putting the time into, okay, the way forward for me is to get some people to help me. Plan out what the structure will look like. It might not be at the end, but further down the track. Okay, I'm a sole trader today, let's say, but the business I'm building in a few years' time should have this role, this role, this role, this role, and this role. Great. In terms of which one comes first, as a rule of thumb, it's going to be one of two for practical purposes. It's going to be either a role which generates money, a sales role, for example, a marketing role, because it's not that it's right necessarily, but for most people early in their business, maintaining cash flow is pretty important. If it's not a direct money generating role, measure it by this role, to what extent will it free me, the owner? I know in the first coaching business I built, the first one I employed was actually an admin finance. It saved me half of my week, which meant I could go and generate the money. So the first role, I think it's going to be one of those two things. It's either got to generate cash or free you as the owner up enough that you can go and generate the cash.
Yeah, it's interesting. So people are your greatest asset. We've heard that statement. What I think, a lot of business owners don't realize the actual the cost to the business if they don't get that right. I mean, I think it's like 3 times the amount of the employee's annual salary is the actual cost to the business if they leave in the first 12 months. I mean, it's pretty astounding when you look at the impact that can have if you don't get that right.
The direct monetary cost will be significant if you don't get it right. But furthermore, and I've been coaching 15 years now, and obviously ran bigger businesses before then. It's not just the monetary cost. The majority of challenges I come across in clients or members' businesses relate to team, one way or the other. And if you don't get it right, if you don't get the team part right, your business will not succeed, not to a proper level of success. At best, you will reach okay. But unless you've got a really good team of people, a great team of people, running your processes and systems to run the business, you're still going to have to turn up, or there are still going to be lots of problems.
So when you've got things like with team, you've got culture's important, you've got KPIs are important. What are the things for business owners that are listening that are wanting to scale, that maybe have a team or a few people in their team already? What are the things that really help bring everybody in alignment with then what they need to be able to scale?
In terms of getting people in the team aligned, I look at it as being 4 things, but I'm going to add 2 little asterisks at the end. The 4 things that I think need to be clear to keep people aligned. I'm specifically addressing the alignment question here. and I'll use relatively vague language, but hopefully it'll come across fairly clearly. And this is in no particular order. In my experience, you need all four of these things. So it's not one before two, before three, before four. You've just got to have all four. You need to know who does what. So clarity. Now, is that through your org chart and your position commitments, or there are slightly different ways of doing it, but it's got to be really clear who is accountable for what. Everything must be the accountability of one person. The second thing that needs to be in place is the critical elements of how we do it. So for these, every business has a couple of hundred things going on. What is the standard of quality? How do we know each one is being done well? What does well look like? Maybe what's the process? What's the step-by-step? What's the video of someone doing it well? But somewhere it's not just who does what, but it's how do we do this thing? What is our sales process? How do we produce our end-of-month reports? How do we recruit people? All the things in the business. The third thing you have to be really clear on is just what are we all about? Because this is very systematic, these two. But we've still got human beings doing things in the business. So this is where having the culture well defined and actively maintaining that culture. Great, we defined it, but we didn't just file it in a drawer. We actually talk about it and hold people to it and celebrate it, and we live it every day. That's really important. And then the fourth element is just the management systems required to ensure it's all happening. Because in theory, if we know who's doing what and we know how to do it and we know what we're all about and how we behave and operate, well, theoretically, it's all going to happen. But that's just hope. You need to actually have a dashboard in place that checks in each week and each month as to it's happening. You need to actually have a rhythm of communication and interaction and meetings to keep it all on track. Now, if those four things are in place, you should have good alignment. But I mentioned two little asterisks. When it comes to people, there are two other challenges that it seems come up often. One, people are very aware of, the hiring challenge. How do I get the right people? How do I get good people? How do I find them? How do I recruit them? Oh, it's a lot of time. Oh, God, I find all these terrible people. We've all heard all this crap before.
No one can do it better than me too, right?
Oh, and I can never hire anyone because I do this stuff awesome and no one will do it as good as me, and I'm going to keep doing it. Excellent. Well done. But you're right. So hiring, getting good at hiring is vital. The other one that gets neglected too much is actually getting good at management. Not enough people do enough of it. And it's not just you, the owner. The moment you've got a manager in your business, they've got to be actually doing the job of management. What other things a good manager does? And too many people in a management position don't spend enough time actually doing management. They're still getting bogged down in doing the thing. They're getting pulled back down into the activity. First and foremost, managers need to manage. Get the best. If you've got a team of people, you've got to get the best out of them.
Okay, managers need to manage. So what are the types of things they need to manage? If they're not doing the things themselves, they're managing the people.
Yeah, correct.
So what would that look like?
I'll be cheeky for a moment. In an ideal world, you could find a list of about 30 things, 30 sort of straightforward things that every manager can do to get the best out of their team. Because interestingly, there are exactly 30 things they should be doing. And so maybe Google a book, try and find like the 30 essentials of management. That would be the answer to your question, Michelle. But in the event that you didn't want to read all 30 of them, but I may have written that book. Sorry, I apologize. But the sorts of things that we're talking about, it's the quality of your weekly team meeting you hold, the quality of your weekly one-on-ones with each of your direct reports. It's how effectively you give feedback to your team. It's how you think about their strengths and get them to deploy the strengths more often, get them focused in the right areas. It's how you set your KPIs and actually how you use KPIs. Most people actually use KPIs terribly. We don't, in our business, we don't even call them KPIs anymore because it's become a bit of a bad word. So, as I say, there are 30 things.
What do you call them?
Uh,
Okay.
we call them LLIs.
LLIs.
Yeah. The problem with KPIs, in my experience, or actually there are lots of problems, but one of the problems is KPIs actually accidentally get conflated with targets. And I don't think that's where they can add the most value. Where I find them valuable is if a staff member has, obviously they have a job, they have particular accountabilities, particular outcomes they need to produce, results, targets, great, that should all be very clear. Where a KPI, I will end up with what I call them, by the way, but where they can add the greatest value is not at the end of the month or end of the year saying you didn't hit it, so we're firing you or we're not paying a bonus, or by the way, you hit it, so you get your bonus. What they should be doing is they should be indicators that you're on track. Early indicators to help you get on track, ideally help you stay on track. They should sometimes, if you're not on track, they should be early indicators of, okay, you're not quite on track, but here's where you need to improve. Or maybe it's here's where I, your manager, need to give you a bit more support, a bit more mentoring, a bit more training. Sometimes it might be an early indicator that actually, here's where we as a business need to improve our process. They shouldn't be a scary thing. They should be a helpful thing that really early just helps everyone spot. You're on track, great, keep going, or you're not on track, let's make an adjustment. So we call them LLIs, which stands for Lead Learning Indicators. It's purely an indicator, an early indicator, that we all just need to learn something here. We need to help you get better, or we need to improve our process. And then people aren't scared of them.
So, how often should teams get together? You mentioned weekly.
Yeah.
How often should teams get together to talk about things like, not just obviously measuring whether they're on track, that's important. But, you mentioned as point number 3, what are we all about? Like, is that something that they should do annually? Strategic planning?
What we're all okay. Well, how often they should get together to talk about what is part of the question. So, I think there might be 2 parts of the answer here. And when I say the team now, I'm talking about a manager and their direct reports. I'm not necessarily talking about the whole company here. But for example, if you're a manager and you've got whatever it is, half a dozen direct reports, you as a team should be getting together once a week minimum. But that is not to review and do your strategic plan. The weekly meeting, in summary, is to maintain the rhythm of the business. It's to stay on track. It's not to solve problems. It's not to go deep on our sales activity. There is an agenda I prefer, which, funnily enough, you can find in the book. But it's to keep the rhythm going. Make sure we're on track and identify early if there's a gap or a problem. And agree who's going to resolve it. Not sit here for hours resolving everything. These meetings tend to be short, maximum 1 hour. But over time, it's one of my favorite sayings in business. Boring is profitable. Drama is not. This design is all about keeping things on track, maintaining the rhythm. So maintain the rhythm. And what happens when you maintain the rhythm and you keep on top of things is drama doesn't appear. So these meetings actually have a habit of getting a bit shorter and a bit shorter and a bit less interesting. They become a bit boring. And then you're tempted to stop doing them. Oh, and isn't that a ridiculous idea? It's going so well, we stop doing it.
I don't need to do this anymore.
I don't need to do this. It's become quite boring. It's the same with one-on-ones. The weekly one-on-one, it becomes a bit, it's the same as last week. We haven't got much to talk about. Everything's ticking along. And after a while, let's not bother this week. There's something exciting to look at. There's a shiny object literally flying past my window. And it's quite dramatic, so I'm going to go on. So the weekly meetings are just keeping the rhythm. But it should be, often for most businesses, you'll also have a sales meeting at some point. Well, that might only be fortnightly. Your quarterly planning meeting. Well, that's done quarterly. Your annual planning meeting, that's done annually. So there are different activities in the business that require different frequency of interactions. The question specifically about what we're all about, culture, how we operate, I think that's something that should get talked about and should come up in the team most days. When you're giving feedback, it relates back often to a point of culture. At minimum, my personal preference, I like to have it talked about in the team meeting every week. So in our team meetings, it's a standing agenda point. 5 or 10 minutes, we randomly pick one of our points of culture and just talk about, why is this one important? What does this look like? How can we get better at this? How are we doing on this? What was a good example of this? What was a bad example of this? Just talk about it, because then you're bringing it to the conscious mind. It's going into the subconscious mind. It becomes habit. And that just, the culture is consistent.
Gosh, love that. What's one that you spoke about last week or this week?
Simplify. Funnily enough, this one isn't one of our technical points of culture, but it's part of how we operate, and it's something we believe is really important. And I think often in the modern world, it's not just in business, there's too much of a tendency to just overcomplicate and add more, and especially now, because if you involve technology, we can make this thing so incredibly clever. And so stop, simplify. And a few of us, myself included, we've changed things like our morning priming routine, certain activities in the business, certain processes, go down to just one thing. We simplify has been a bit of a theme for a while. And anyway, that's one we talked about this week.
Thank you for sharing that. So for the sake of simplifying this for people listening, when, like you see quite often there's a disconnect with team in organizations where people, have their own agenda or aren't aligned with that greater purpose or standard maybe of why we do what we do. What are some strategies? I'm going to keep dropping that strategy word in there.
I'm being really good. I'm not picking you up at all, Michelle. But can you please stop doing it?
Okay. What are some tools that companies can use that can so you start to see the breadcrumbs for things like that, don't you? When there's a lack of alignment or somebody's, gone off on a tangent. What is a tool that you can use that really brings everybody back to the core of why we're doing what we're doing?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to something we talked about a minute ago, and then I'm gonna share something that Stephen, my business partner, taught me, which I really like. I'm going to emphasize again, this type of thing. This is the type of thing this is the job of management. Having these conversations, keeping people aligned, spotting when they're not aligned. So this should be just, hopefully it's not happening all the time, but this is standard activity for managers. Your job as a manager is to get your team going in the right direction, keep them going in the right direction, keep the motivation up, all these sorts of things. So it is the job of management. Stephen taught me, I don't know if it's his originally or it came from somewhere else, but he taught me a great saying, great habit: walk towards difficult conversations. And I mentioned before, one of the things managers need to do is get good at giving feedback. I'm a big fan of when you see these little crumbs, go and confront them early, quickly. Because when it's a little crumb, it's usually actually pretty easy to have a conversation about it. It's when the crumb becomes 3 crumbs, and then the 3 crumbs becomes a slice of bread, and the slice of bread becomes a big ugly loaf of bread, and then good luck. Then it becomes difficult. But people don't want to have these conversations. Managers avoid this stuff. And so I think part of the job of a manager is to walk towards difficult conversations. If you spot the crumbs, go and give the feedback effectively. Help the person or the people, the team, whoever's relevant, help them to think through and recognize what they're doing. Help them to work out the impact it's having and why it's a problem. Help them to come up with how they're going to get back on track, align the right way. and have that conversation as early as possible.
Mm. And so, I mean, I think if that's one of the most common challenges that managers have is leaning in towards those difficult conversations. What are some questions? Is that done through questioning? What are some questions that you can do in a way that's not confronting and is empowering versus disempowering?
Mm-hmm. And I'll go beyond empowering. I actually think vital. And what I mean by that is when you're having these conversations, almost certainly you're having them in the intent to get a change of behavior. You want the people you're talking to actually do something differently, whatever it is. And in my experience, the only way they're going to actually change is to think through it themselves, to come up with it themselves. People are not great at being told what to do. And that seems to relate to anyone from about my boys are now teenagers, and I'm not sure they love being told what to do, but just telling people what they're doing wrong hasn't historically been the most effective way of getting them to change. There's like, of course, they sit there and they nod and smile. So asking the right questions is in my experience the key, and doing it in a way that doesn't terrify them, confront them, and annoy them is the secret. So the way I look at it is, you need them to have 3 realizations, and the 3 must happen in a sequence. And so in a sense, there's 3 questions to ask, but there's a way of asking them. So, and I'll give examples. The first realization someone has to have if they're going to change behavior is, what is it they're doing now that's not right? They need to actually recognize, yes, I know I'm supposed to be following this process, but I'm not. Now, if you walk in front of them and say, why aren't you following the process? That's not going to be a fun conversation. Technically, it's a question. It's an open question, but it's a horrible question. If instead you walked in and you maybe have a couple of softening conversation first, but you then ask questions like, so Michelle, tell me a bit about how you're deploying our sales process at the moment. That's a much softer way of asking it. Then they answer that question. You're then able to go on and perhaps go a bit deeper and a bit narrower. Okay, great. That's how you use it. Excellent. And how are you, when you're getting to step 5 in our sales process, how are you finding that works for you? I know that you're not doing step 5 at all, but I'm not going to throw that at you. I'm going to ask nice and gently. I'm going to get you to think through. Oh, I'm doing this, but yeah, actually, I am having a couple of problems at step 5. Oh yeah, tell me a bit more about that. I'm just getting narrower and narrower, digging down to the point where you say, yeah, I'll be honest, I haven't actually practiced step 5 at all, and I haven't been using step 5. Okay, now I go to number 2. You've now realized I'm not doing step 5 properly. I'm then going to get my overarching question is, what's the impact? So I'm going to ask something like, okay, so step 5 is causing you a few problems, and what's the impact that's having on your conversion rate? Oh, I seem to be not signing too many. I seem to be losing some. Oh yeah, and how does that play out? Oh, I don't know. People just stop responding to me, or they get upset, or whatever it is. I'm asking questions to help you realize that actually skipping step 5 is a problem. And then the last question, of course, is, okay, what can we do about this? So at some level, you're asking, what is it you're actually doing? What's the impact of that? And what are you going to do differently in future? But thinking about planning and preparing the right questions, because as you said, if you ask it the wrong way, it doesn't work.
No, and that just feels like such a much easier, cohesive way of addressing the problem. Someone said to me recently that, the line around, people leave organizations because they believe their manager doesn't like them.
Yeah.
Like, is that true?
Oh, look, I think I've seen a few studies on this, and I've not done them myself, but my experience certainly doesn't contradict the studies. And I think what I've seen, the stat I've seen most often is of all the reasons people leave a business, 68% it's their manager, their direct manager. Now, sometimes that takes the obvious form. I hate my manager, so I left the company. But a lot of it is a bit more nuanced. The reality is, I left the company because I got no recognition. I left the company because I wasn't moving forward and getting no development. I left the company because I got no feedback. I left the company because I wasn't enjoying the type of work I was being given. I left the company. Well, hang on a second. All of these come down to your manager. So if anything, I suspect it's even more than 68%. Yeah. Management is such a valuable thing to master in a business. Because if you've got 10 people and they all do well, if you've got 100 people, it's the ultimate point of leverage in a business.
So next level, when it comes for time for business owners to employ a manager of a department or the business, whether it's general manager, quite often I've seen where the best salesperson gets promoted to sales manager, but they actually have got no management skills or training. So it's how does a business owner or leader of an owner of an organization or leader of an organization then train the trainer, or what are the best management tools for management?
Well, is that a question, Michelle, about how and when you employ a manager, or because in a way that the management, how you manage a team of 8 direct reports is actually incredibly similar to how you manage a manager.
Got it.
The exact topics you might be talking about will vary a little bit. As you go up every level in an organization, you go from being a doer to a team lead to a supervisor to a manager to whatever the titles are. Three things change. As you move up, you typically need to learn some more skills. So let's say you've gone from being a doer to a manager. Well, obviously now you need to learn some things about how to manage. So if you're in turn their manager, you've got to help them with that. Coach them on it. Give them feedback on their management. The person you've just promoted into management, don't end up just talking about all the functional stuff going on in their team. Make sure you're actually talking to them about their management practices, helping them get good as a manager. So the skills have to change. Their time allocation has to change as they move up. Suddenly, they used to spend 100% of their time doing stuff. Well, now they've got to spend, depending on the size of their team, at least 50% of their time getting the best out of their people, managing. So they've got to spend more time planning, tracking progress, monitoring performance, these sorts of things. So their time allocation has to change. You've got to help them with that. The third thing, and this is the most subtle, but it's really important, as they move up from being a doer to a manager, some of their core identity, some of their value system has to change. When they're a doer, and you said it, the great salesperson, typically, the great salesperson values the thrill of the chase, winning that big deal, the excitement of it. They probably enjoy the recognition of their personal achievement. They like getting up on stage and winning the prize and getting recognized for, you're awesome, you're our top salesperson. The moment they go into management, they have to value the performance of their team more than they value their own. They've got to value the glory of their team member more than the glory of themselves. They've got to value their time completely differently, because they're no longer running $1 million portfolio of clients. They're now running a $10 million sales team. That's how their time gets valued. So you, as their manager, have to help them shift their values.
Management versus leadership. What's the difference between leadership and a management?
I have to be careful here. Probably half my answer wouldn't impress too many people. In a way, leadership is, one way some people would put it, leadership is almost about motivation. Leadership is creating the pull. Leadership can be creating the why. We're here. Leaders have followers. That is relevant to some people in some roles. Management is, in my view, the more practical, frequent, common activity that anyone with people reporting to them must do to get the best out of their people. Unfortunately, I love leadership stuff. And I remember, going to business school, these endless late night debates about what leadership is. And we all thought it was so clever. And there are a gazillion books written on leadership. I've got some really good ones there. Leadership's pretty cool. It's a bit like strategy. If you can call yourself a leader, you're awesome, okay? Like my son, he's a cricket player, and he got to be captain of his cricket team. And he's talking about leadership. I'm like, oh, for God's sake, you're a 15-year-old playing cricket. Tell the guy where to stand in the field. You don't need to, No, but don't get me wrong, leadership is great. But more often than not, people just need to get focused on doing management first. Do the basics. Get the best out of your people, most of which is just management. And it doesn't sound cool and it's not trendy. Michelle, we've been hard done by in business. Leadership became really trendy. And unfortunately, most of the activities to be a good manager suffer from 3 conflicts in psychology. To be a good manager is pretty basic stuff. Unfortunately, what happens though, its payoff is slow. I go and walk past one of my team in the corridor, give them some good feedback. It's not like I make more money the next day. Over time, that's going to help create a really great person. So it's slow burn. It's not instant gratification. I can't attach a number to it. And, we've all been trained, of course, what you can measure, you can manage and so on. And I'm quite commercially oriented. I like that detail. I like the money stuff. But a lot of the management stuff, it doesn't have a number attached to it. And the worst part of it, the actual activities of management are so unimpressive. They're so basic. And since I was little, my school taught me to demonstrate my brilliance. Show me how clever you are, Andrew, they said to me. And at university, we had to be really great. And we admire, and people naturally want to do the sexy stuff. I want to come up with the biggest, coolest strategy. I want to pioneer the new innovation. I want to make the biggest sale. The act of spending half an hour thinking about one of my team members and crafting some effective feedback for them the next day is just so uncool and unsexy. So we don't do it. So I love leadership, but in the end, I think management more often and in many more cases is more important. And we actually need to do that first.
Oh, so much gold. So much gold. Okay, 3 questions to wrap up.
Yeah.
What's your favorite business book?
Well, the 4 I've written. Come on, Michelle. Of course that's the answer. They're the ones I've spent the most time with. No, that is definitely a joke. As much as I do like them, they are definitely not that great. So I'm not putting them up on. And actually, I
have read them and they are great, actually.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you. I appreciate that. But and I also actually, funnily enough, I usually avoid this question because I'm reluctant. I get nervous when people say, "Hey, everyone, this is the book you have to read." I am a big fan of people reading the book that is most relevant to the things they need to learn now. So if you're focused on sales for the next 6 months, go and read the best 3 sales books. Don't go and read the book I mentioned. But over the last year, one book and one concept seems to have dominated me a bit. And I love the book, and clients love it. A lot of people, it's come up a lot. And it's Dan Sullivan's book, 10x is easier than 2x. And, it reflects, I also read last year, Slow Productivity, Cal Newport's latest book, Amp It Up by Frank Slootman, How Big Things Get Done. There is a common thread that I really love through all of these, doing less and doing it incredibly well. So 10x is easier than 2x is probably my favorite from the last year, but it's not the right book for everyone.
Yeah, which really speaks to that. How can we win, or where can you win? Great. Okay, question number 2. Who's been the best mentor or coach for you throughout your career?
Can I have 2?
Yes.
Different parts of my career?
Yes.
My first manager, straight out of uni, I was very lucky. He was a bit older, he's very experienced. And he was incredibly generous in doing everything in his power to help me and his other team, but help me be better. He took a lot of time to teach me, to empower me, to put me up in lights when they needed our team strategy presented to the board. He got me as his trainee to present it. He didn't take the glory. He didn't do it. He taught me the value of people. He taught me how to give feedback. And I had no clue what I was doing at that stage. And he just gave so much. So yeah, he was my first. A guy called Cole Williamson. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he's had an incredible impact on my career, my life, and he was fabulous. But that's a while ago. My first job wasn't recent. So more recently, oddly enough, I have a mate who actually started by coaching me in rock climbing, which doesn't have much to do with anything. But he's become my most effective recent business coach because he's got a remarkable way of an ability to get me to realize, confront, and progress. To actually realize where I am and where I need to shift and be willing to confront that. I've been fairly successful in coaching, and I plateaued for a while and got a bit static. And it was him that helped me make the breakthrough to move up in my personal coaching, to begin with BGB, to actually move forward, to confront the reality that I needed to shift, and then to actually do something about it. So so Julie, he's amazing.
And what's been the best piece of business advice that you've ever received?
Actually, that's simple, and our half-hour conversation reflects it. People. It's all about the people. It's incredibly simple and endlessly challenging because it is improving the culture, recruiting the right people, developing people, giving feedback, coaching them. There's so much to it, but it's all about the people. You've got great people in your team. Everything's awesome.
Andrew, thank you for the strategies that you've helped us with today. I just throw that in, sorry.
I'm away in tears. You know how to wind me up.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time. Some valuable insights today. Thanks, Andrew.
Absolute pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Michelle Adams, your host here. Hats off to you for committing to your learning by listening to this podcast. And if you'd like some help implementing some of these strategies, then click the link in the description to find your local action coach. They can help you put these strategies into action and take your business and your life to the next level. In the meantime, like and subscribe so that you're the first to get our next episode. We'll see you soon.